Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Thanks again, folks. Again, I'm Bruce Broussard, your host here, the Oregon Voters Digest. As you know, we've been doing some series, if you will, on the whole issue of police, and we were fortunate to be able to talk about the subject with someone that's very familiar here within the Portland metropolitan area. And I'm talking about Don DeVray. I mean, he was actually a Portland policeman, Portland cop, Portland law enforcement person. And he's written a book, Behind the Badge in River City. It's a very interesting book. I had the opportunity to read the book, and it was enlightening. But besides that, he's been on the show now about a couple of times already, and so far, and it's interesting about some of the comments that were being made. I don't know if you had the opportunity to look at the show, but you can go to YouTube and pick up the last two shows, and so it's been very interesting. And as you note, within the country, for that matter, we're having some major issues trying to figure out what are we going to do about public safety. And it's a very difficult situation. It's sort of like a crisis handler. But I can tell you for sure that my experience after reading the book, if you will, and having had the opportunity to interview Don and sharing him with you, for that matter, it's been very enlightening. There's been a lot of things that I've learned, and giving me a better feel in terms of what direction we need to go in. And so I want to thank you, Don. Right before we get to this particular piece, I want to thank you very much, and I want to thank you for those out there who are watching too, because you have really helped the folks out. Because the bottom line, what I really learned, and I've talked to a number of people about it, is that now I have some idea who's responsible.
Yes,
we are.
We are.
We are the public, the voter are. And basically we hire a person to basically take that task. We've given them a job, and that's the elected officials. Mm-hmm. We've got to pay more attention about the people that we elect to office. Yeah. And in this particular case, and I'm not picking on any particular person right now, but Charlie Hill happens to be the mayor. But we've got an upcoming mayoral election, and this is going to be definitely at the front of the line, if you will, with reference to how do we deal with the issue. Oh. It's not the police person. That person has got to do a job. They got to get out there and do a job. And that's a tough job. I've learned that as I just sitting up here listening to you. Besides that, even after the show aspect of it. So again, we want to thank you very much for giving us the opportunity that you were able to share with us the background of being a policeman and this, that, and the other. Now I think we can go forward.
Yes.
Now I also brought along a person who was very instrumental in putting this piece together. I know you were the publisher. You had to talk to someone. Yeah. And that has to be the editor, someone that they put it in such a fashion that one can communicate with it. And she's right here. She just happens to be your partner. Okay. And I'm talking about Teresa Dupay, and it's been. I want to thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for stopping Don long enough, because I knew he had all those papers all over the place, mm-hmm. all the boxes and this, that, and the other. And but my point is that it's tough to write a good book. I mean, to communicate, if you will. Yeah. It's one thing you can communicate. But I can't write a book. Mm-hmm. Okay, and slow them down enough to really get the points out, and this, that, and the other. And so I want to thank you for doing this, and it's been just fantastic. But what we're going to do also too at this point in time, I'm going to ask Don a couple of questions, and then after that, I want to ask you a few questions. Okay? All right, Don. Let's talk about. I only have about 3 questions here. I think I just jotted them out real quick. So, what projects are you working on now?
Well, Bruce, this book is about what went on in the '60s in the Albina district, and I want people to understand right up front that I've never been anti-police. This is not an anti-police book. I am and always have been anti-abuse. People who disregard the Constitution are not our friends. So it's not about hating the cops. It's about holding people responsible that need to be responsible. Now, what am I working on for the summer? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, writers write. That's what we do. And I'm writing another book. It's called The 4 Stories, mm-hmm. and be from the Hollywood Theater to the Benson Hotel. Mm-hmm. And it's not about police work. So we're not going to talk particularly about that tonight, but that's what I'm working on. Is a good book about what it's like in growing up in the 1950s in the Portland area, where I lived in the Hollywood district, and the Hollywood Theater was a big a big deal to me because that's where we went every Saturday afternoon to the matinees to watch Roy Rogers and,
I got you.
and the Singing Cowboys.
You got the bug. That's what you're telling me. You got the bug now.
I got the bug.
And you're still going to school, right? You'll be graduating
so
pretty soon too, right? Aren't you?
Well, I'm not in any particular hurry.
Right, right. I noticed that. I noticed that.
However, I am working on a degree, and sometime in the next 2 years, I will graduate.
I think you will now, especially with Teresa sitting there by your side.
Absolutely,
yeah. But before we leave that other point with reference to this, is that, man, just thinking about this, that what do you hope to gain from having written behind the badge in River City? What do you have to gain with it? I know you've said a lot. In fact, you've said it. Really. But if I were to ask you just one statement,
it's about correcting the images that are incorrect. Mm-hmm. It's about one of the things that seems to be going on right now is some revisionist history. A couple of college professors here have written a paper that's not historically accurate. Mm-hmm. There's a piece coming out now called Losing Albina, which is not historically accurate. So it's about presenting the way it was, the way it is, and this is the facts. And if you're going to write something about history in Portland, you probably should come and talk to me because I was there. There's interesting points about the riots that went on in the 1960s. I was there. I worked the riots. I had on the blue helmet. I sweat under it. I had my shotgun. I had my gun in my pocket. Come on.
Well, now you got to remember now, you got to understand, people like you weren't around. In fact, people weren't around when I asked the cops to come on and to basically share with us exactly what that work was all about.
Yeah.
So, but again, we are in a crisis, so to speak, and people are reacting. And they've got all kinds of opinions out there. Yeah. And as you know, and I'm not going to get into the quote, the masters and all those degrees aspect of it, when one puts together a thesis, they get out there and put information together. And if people not like you are not around, they get the degree. Yeah. And I'm not knocking it, but that's that system, okay? So, but again, thankful, hopefully these people will now contact you and read your book.
Law enforcement is at a crisis now. Yeah. The cops are under a lot of scrutiny, as they always should be, but there's a lot of information that's incorrect about the police, and here it goes back again to who's in charge. Who's in charge? Because the cop, he goes to work, he gets in his car, he goes to work, and he does what the people above him have told him to do. And who sets the policy? Who sets the rules? The unions do. The mayors do, the district attorneys do. Those are the ones that are actually responsible, and we need to hold those leaders accountable.
The voter.
The voters. We're the one. We're the one.
We're responsible. And I learned that. And I keep going back to that same point because that's what I learned after I read the book and having sit down with you and having these interviews. It's a very serious. I mean, it's very serious. That's the focus, and that's where we need to go. We need to go. Yeah. And because I know that because the area about training, a lot of people talk about training and this, that, and the other. But again, that's all policy and guidelines and this, that, and the other. But again, that gets put together, and then we, the people, need to know what that is.
Yes.
That needs to be, that need to know, whether it be profiling, whether it be shooting someone, or people are very disappointed about folks, somebody gets shot, if you will, by a cop, and they can take off to Hawaii for a month or two. That kind of stuff. Or not being interviewed after some shooting after 24 hours or something. You said those kinds of things.
Yes.
And I think that's very important, even for their safety too. And that whole issue about stress. Yes. About stress and the alcoholism and drugs and being able to divorce. That's a major stuff. So I'm saying that hopefully what we've done here in the studio is that we've given them a path, if you will, towards a solution.
Yes.
I don't like the idea of kids being called gangs. I really don't. True community policing was a point that you had made. From the standpoint, you had an area that you were responsible for. If you saw somebody driving along that you didn't recognize at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you'd stop them. Now that's community policing to me.
It is.
You see what I'm saying? Being able to know the people within the area, being able to know what the kids are all about in the area. You're still a law enforcement person. You're not a basketball player. You're a law enforcement. And don't get me wrong. I realize, people are trying to say, well, you need to do this, that, and the other. I want you to be a I want a person to be, I want safety. I want public safety. I'd like to see the cars going back, if you will, i.e. printed on the car. Public safety officer, if you will. Public safety, was it law enforcement? There used to be a logo on the cars here as far as the police car is concerned. I know it was a Rose City, but it was public safety, serving as something. What was
Protect and serve, I believe.
Protect and serve.
Yeah.
Protect and serve. I'd like to see that come back. And so that citizens can feel comfortable about that. Being able to walk to the store and get some milk or something in the evening or at night or this, that, and the other, walk down. Because we got a lot of seniors now that are retiring, if you will, and people don't want to be moving out their neighborhood. We got other issues that concern.
Police officers also have a responsibility too. People need to understand that it's a police officer's responsibility in their district to make sure he knows what's going on in that district. That's where you hold me responsible, because I'm responsible for this area. I'm going to be responsible for knowing who's in there, because if I don't, then I can't protect you.
Well, you're policing the community.
I'm policing the
now it's community policing. So it's the real deal, right? You're policing the community. So all we have to do is just reverse it a bit and whatever, you know what I'm saying? So again, that's great. So now let's get down with Teresa now. Teresa, you know, you had the opportunity getting the box, sort of like putting it together, so to speak, and then basically coming up with your own outline in terms of what you need to do to come up with this product, right? So you probably went back and things that you didn't understand, you probably went back and maybe set up some appointments to talk to people, and then you had the opportunity, because he was a cop at one point in time, to talk to those folks that he said what he said about in the piece, right? That's legitimacy. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, what
did you do?
I didn't interview anyone in the book, because most of the people in the book are dead, and the people that aren't mentioned or named probably wouldn't agree to an interview. It's very difficult to get police officers to talk, particularly police officers of Don's generation. But what I did do is I got a copy of Don's personnel file, which helped with the book a lot, because it corroborated dates and times and places and names. There were 2 or 3 names that we had spelled incorrectly because we didn't have access to those kinds of documents. But the personnel file was really, really instrumental in helping to improve the accuracy of the book. But I basically just took what he had, which was a manuscript, 235 pages, typed from 91 and 92. The pages were yellowing with age. It was about 22, 23 years old. And we just worked from that. We scanned it, and then we just spent 2.5 years beefing it up, adding stories to it, switching stories around, trying to improve the chronology of events, things like that. But it was very challenging.
Tell me something, was it difficult getting his file, or did he pick it up himself?
You know, it wasn't difficult at all. It just kind of happened. I really believe in destiny, because I wasn't even looking for it. It just happened. I volunteered for a couple of shifts at the police museum.
Really?
With Jim Huff. A current police officer told me that he needed help, and I had the summer off, and I contacted him, and he said sure, and I came out, and he had me filing photographs in old personnel files that are currently now over in the Archives and Records Center on PSU campus. So it was just a very funny event, the way it happened. It was very happenstance. And I asked him if he knew of Don's file, and he said he had looked for it and couldn't find it. And then I went, and I think I only got from A to D when I did the filing, and there it was. It was the last file in the back of D.
Really?
Yes. 166 pages. It was just one of those moments that you never forget, because my heart just was in my throat, and I wasn't expecting it, and there it was, and I was so excited, because I knew what it meant to the book.
Well, what about other police officers, if you will, who had retired, if you will? Were they accommodating? Were you able to?
Well, I mean, I've interviewed 8 police officers, including a female police officer. And I've learned a great deal from those interviews, because they're all long interviews. I wanted them to have the opportunity to speak their mind, share their experiences, share their perspective, share their opinions about various things, because too many people don't try to understand what it's like to be a police officer. All I can do as a civilian is try to understand what it must be like. Too many people, as Don said once, they paint all police officers with the same brush, and that's wrong, because it's not good to do that for any person. You know, it's not good to generalize or to label any group of people, and too many people do that with cops.
Anybody that wants to look at my personnel file It's available.
It's public record.
That's
That's
public
public
record.
record.
Yeah.
That's
But
the
you said the
interesting part.
history. You went to
Yeah.
the museum, right? You went to the museum. Well, is that where all the public records are?
They
Well, they
there.
were. They were there until the word got out that they were there. And then some things happened, and they
Wait a
were...
minute, wait.
Well, the archive people decided they shouldn't have them. We should have them, and properly so.
So they were
So
hurried
now they're
over.
in the archives, available for anybody to look at. If
Archive, what city? With the city of Portland?
it's the City of Portland archives.
Right. It's
Most
Portland
retired
City
police
Archives.
officers'
Yeah.
personnel files are there.
Okay.
If you want to go down and look up your favorite retired policeman, his file is there. Just
there
look
are-
through it.
there are
Get
a
a
lot.
copy, take it home.
Is that right?
There are a lot of copies that are missing because I know there's 3 or 4 men that I interviewed. Their copies, their personnel files weren't there. So it's a hodgepodge. There's a lot of copies of personnel files from the teens, 1915, 1920, but I didn't find a lot from the 80s or the 90s. So there were about, I think I've interviewed 8 police officers. Of those 8 police officers, I only found Don's personnel file. I didn't
Really?
find the others. But that's because they only took 120 boxes from the police museum to the archives center. But I know that I was told that there were an equal number in the basement of the Justice Center. And I don't believe those have been, I don't believe that those were included in the shipment over to the Portland Archives and Records. But yeah, I wasn't able to find any personnel file of any of the other police officers that I interviewed.
Tell me something. You know, you edit this book, and we've done this piece with Don, and you met me, and we basically talked. You heard us in terms of the interviews. We've had Fred Stewart here at one point in time.
Fred,
But
yeah.
then at the same time, you hear all these things that were happening back east. You know, and the shootings and this, that, and the other, and whatever. And now you're wearing your other hat now. What did you think about that?
We are in a
feel that?
crisis
Okay.
nationally because it's 2015, because everyone has a cell phone, because everyone has a video, a camera on their cell phone. They can do videos. What happened in South Carolina, I was chilled when I saw that video of Michael Slager shooting that black man in the back and murdering him. That would never have been possible to record that 10 years ago even. But we are in a crisis because there are numerous examples of really horrendous police misconduct. And so a lot of civilians come to the conclusion that all cops are bad, and that's wrong. And that's why people have to try to maintain a balance between those small numbers of cops who do terrible things, and it's probably less than 1%, and the majority of police officers who are genuine, good people trying to make a difference. And people just need to remember that. And, you know, but we are at a crisis. I mean, yeah.
Okay. Now, you know, we've thrown on the table about the fact who's responsible. You know, that's kind of like where I'm going to. How did you feel about that from the standpoint of saying, when we made the point, I made the point about the fact that we are responsible as citizens, and we basically give that responsibility to the elected official, and then they're supposed to basically do the checks and balance and this, that, and the other, and come back to us, making sure that it's being done right. We still want public safety.
Sure.
How do you feel? Are we going the
Well,
right
I
direction?
mean, public safety is dependent on so many different things. It's not simply dependent on the conduct of police. Public safety is dependent on how parents raise their children. And too many parents don't raise their children very well. And we live in a society that glorifies rappers who rap about killing cops, who hate police, and sometimes they have a valid reason because there are corrupt police officers who do bad things. But we live in a society that it's just difficult. It's difficult not to go to one extreme, and that's what I see. I see a lot of people going to one extreme. You know, they either love cops and no matter what they do, that's okay, or they despise cops and they're all rotten. It's not good to entertain that kind of mentality because we need to be balanced somewhere in the center. We need to have a more balanced outlook on law enforcement. But in terms of how to how to lessen crime. It takes a village. It takes a village, and it's not just up to police. It's up to parents, because honestly, the character of your child is determined, number one, by their home life, by what kind of example they have in terms of a father or a mother. And police simply can't fulfill that role. So,
I remember the brief lyrics of one rap song that really irritated me at the time. Got a 12 gauge, sawed off, got some cops gonna dust off. What does that tell our kids? What does that tell our kids? These rappers are probably responsible for a lot of these gang shootings. I got a 12 gauge, sawed off, gonna dust off some cops. That's bullshit.
You know, you make a point, and I'm gonna throw one back on you. You had made mention when we started talking about this, the possum incident up in Northeast Portland, and we talked about it briefly, and you made the point about, well, Bruce, the reason why they did that was because they were angry about the Stevens there, the Marine that was strangled, basically choked to death, so to speak, and killed him. You know, they said. You want to expand a bit on that a little bit? How did they get to the point where they were angry to the point that they were able to, they did that kind of? It was kind of like I said, my reaction was I got involved in that whole deal. It was like somebody just threw out some coons or whatever, and they wanted to make a point about black folks in Northeast Portland.
I think they were angry at the two cops that got in trouble for it.
But why would they do that?
The problem was,
of course, this is before my time.
Yeah.
The chokehold, which had been effective for years and years, was now held up as this has got to stop.
Right.
Okay.
And they were angry about the tool that they've been using successfully, myself included.
Okay.
I choked lots and lots of people, never killed anybody.
Yeah.
So they were angry at the fact that the tool they've been using was now no longer acceptable, and then they exercised really bad judgment by killing possums and throwing it in front of the burger barn, which was.
And the T-shirts.
It was a black
and
business.
the T-shirts,
It's a black business and the T-shirt aspect of it. But it really had a major impact on black people.
It did, and it should have.
I was a publisher of the Observer at that point in time, and that's why we marched downtown.
Don't choke them, smoke them.
Yeah,
that was just incredibly naive nonsense for these officers to do that. And I still think they should have suffered more than they did because of it. Because when you have that kind of mentality, wow.
But like I said, that's history now, and hopefully,
it's history,
going into the right direction at this point in time. Now, tell me this, Tracy, back, Don, you can also throw out this. Now, as a reaction to this book, what kind of reactions have you gotten? One, from the police community, and two, from folks that you might have interviewed. Don, what kind of reaction did you get?
What I'm laughing about is I haven't gotten any reaction.
Oh, wow.
You know, I'm still waiting for somebody to argue with me. Nobody wants to say anything.
You did such a good job. I know you did a good job on me. I got you here 3 weeks in a row.
A lot of the police officers that have read it, and I know they have, are saying, "Yeah, you're good because you're bringing some really good points."
Good.
A lot of them are thinking to themselves, "No, you're full of baloney."
Okay.
You know, this is wrong, that's wrong, but they don't come out and say. They're not challenging me. They're not calling in and saying, "Well, I don't believe this, I don't believe that." So it's kind of like the silence is deafening. I don't know.
The other thing is, we only published this in the last part of February, so March, April, May. It's been about 3.5 months, so we're still in the infancy of this process. But what we have heard from most people has only been positive. There's a few reviews on Amazon.com. They're all glowing reviews. So, you know, it's a great book. It's a good book in the sense that narratively it's entertaining. It's very descriptive, and it's as chronologically correct as I was able to make it. But it's an important book because it really shows the process of burnout, and that's the theme of the book. The theme of the book is the arc and the process of burnout. He goes from being a kid, the safety patrol, to being a teenager in the back of the Coffee Brothers patrol car, to becoming a young police officer, and everything that entails, until he gets to the point where he's burnt out, he's discouraged, he's physically suffering because of a high blood pressure, a bleeding ulcer, and depression. And I've read several studies on criminology, and the typical age for a 15 to 20 year veteran to basically opt out is 42, and he was 42. He was textbook in the sense that he was burnt out. He wasn't getting support. At a time when there just wasn't a lot of support, which is, I mean, it's good now that officers have more access to psychological services and counseling today, because back when Don was an officer, you just manned up, or you left, and he did police work for as long as he could, and then he resigned. So.
And just a little bit more in regards to today's cop.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Today's cop is suffering the same burnout, the same stress.
Yeah.
Police work hasn't changed. Technology has added some good things and some bad things, but I still think that they ought to be able to retire when they're at 15 years.
Yeah.
Because once you're starting to go to work with an attitude, oh well, I got put in another 8 hours. I got to listen to some more of this nonsense.
Right.
It's time to go, and they should be able to go honorably, not have to worry about their future.
And we've seen that kind of burnout with officers like Sean Southern, an excellent police officer by all reputation, and he ended up with an alcohol problem, and other officers who have indicated through their behavior that they're really suffering from burnout. It's true, I agree with Don, that they should be allowed to retire at about 15 years, because anything beyond that, they get to a point where they've heard it all, they've seen it all, everybody lies to them, so they can trust nobody because everyone's a liar. They get so cynical that they just can't be as engaged because they stop caring, I think. I'm not an expert on police work, but I'm just speculating.
You do have
here.
a degree.
Well, it's in criminology, but not police work.
She has a degree in criminology.
No, I heard that. That's the same thing you're talking about there. See? Now, the other thing I was going to ask you about, in terms of how our so-called spokesman reacted to a shooting, the art thing and whatever, and reacted by saying, "Well, I'm gonna get 3 more cops assigned to the gang unit." Well, why do we have to have a gang unit? Why can't we just have a police? Why can't police do the work? Well, why do we have to have a gang unit? I mean, those are some questions that folks have asked.
They love the specialization. We're the vice squad. We do vice. We're the arson investigators. We do arson. We're the gang squad. We do gang. I agree with you. It should be just police work.
No, I disagree.
But
Okay,
the gang unit is important. The gang unit is important.
specialization is important.
But I know. But my point is that again, that's a concern in the black community, because one, it was a gang. Whenever you think about gang, it's black.
That's true.
I'm just straight up. It's gang is black, and they reacted to 3 more cops of the gang in the black community. Okay, quote. Okay, so consequently, everybody's open to that. Let's get some more kids on the list. They're gang members, and their whole life is gone. There's a list running around. See, so I'm just saying that those are some of the things that you brought out was brought out in the books, but people are calling me about this whole thing. See what I'm saying? So my point is, the leader reacted that way. As far as I'm concerned, he should have reacted to Portland Public Schools and says, okay, fine, we're going to have voc ed to make sure that those kids get some opportunity to get a job or something of that nature. But I was concerned about that.
Adding more policemen is not particularly the answer.
Okay.
Sure, if there's only 2 or 3 and you need more, you should get more. But you're right. It's not the policeman's job to correct the problem they didn't correct in the first place. Adding more policemen to the gang unit isn't necessarily going to do anything. You need to add this to the school. Why are these kids out there in the first place? You need to do something about the parents. Why is your kid out there? What did you do about it? Whose gun did they use? Where did they get it?
Well, that's a whole other issue, though. And I think that the reason we need specialized units is because there's a lot involved with gang investigation that's different from vice investigation or sex crimes or homicide. So I support the specialization of units. I think it's necessary.
But I guess my point is that what happened before that? There was no such thing as gang.
Exactly, and it's taken this long. It's taken 35 years since the gangs from LA came to Portland in '85.
Yeah, but again,
to
blacks,
really,
but we're still talking about black.
Right.
And that's a bad word.
I know.
Okay, I'm just saying, because we see our young people up in Southeast Portland, they're all over the place for that matter. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, anyway, that's another discussion, right? Another book you can put together for us. No
Oh,
problem.
Lord.
You can write mine. You can write mine. Well, look, folks, this has been great. The 3 weeks has been just fantastic. And what we're going to do now is going to give the public the opportunity to look at what we've done. We've done them together purposely, so they can look at the book and use that as a reference guide, if you will, and then go to YouTube and get more background in the discussions we're having. So again, thank you very, very much for that.
Thank you for
Appreciate it
having
very
us.
much. Okay, good. We're going to take a short break, folks, and we'll come right back. But again, get to that YouTube, go out there and check this book out and get involved. Good.
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
Again, welcome back, if you will, folks. And this will be kind of like sort of a wrap up on the whole issue of police work and all this good information that we've gotten from Don Dupre and the idea of being able to read the book here. And it's available, by the way, behind the badge in River City. And so I thought maybe we'd bring a lay person on board. He was on this last show, and I'm talking about Fred Stewart. Fred's a local businessman, former Marine jarhead, community person, very, very active in community, very, very active in issues across the board. And, and I think it's very important and not afraid to speak his mind, which is very, very important. And I've always said that I think he should take that second jump, if you will, and maybe consider being running for office or something. I mean, but I don't know. I might be able to convince him. Welcome, Fred. How you doing?
How you doing, Bruce?
Good. So what we want to do this time around is, and I wanted to keep Don here at this point in time, is get kind of wrap up from these representing the citizenry out there, and kind of get a feel for what from his perspective, what he feels about law enforcement today, and all of the activities that are happening along that line. In fact, Fred has talked to many police officers and the like, and so then at the same time, I wanted him to give us a feel for what we've done here at Cable for the last three Sundays, of that matter, and it's just going to maybe help solve some of the problems with what we presented here at Portland Cable. What do you think, Fred? Talk.
Well, the only way anything we've talked about here on your show, Bruce, if it's going to help, is if it gets people to start asking questions.
If it gets put it up, there you go.
If it gets people to start asking questions.
Okay.
I mean, people.
Questions like what?
Well, what are we going to do about our gang problem? Okay. What are we going to do about lowering violence in Portland in general? Mm-hmm. What are we going to do to address the needs that our cops have? If people out there feel that a police officer or any human being, because a police officer is just a human being just like the rest of us, can face the trials and tribulations that they do to protect us for an extended period of time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and not have some sort of emotional or mental damage, much like our military guys who go over into combat. A lot of our cops, especially our beat cops, they've seen more in their career than a Marine who spent a year in a hot zone, unless that Marine has seen an extensive amount of combat. And a lot of these police officers we've got are former military and have seen actual combat overseas, and then they come to America, back home, and they see combat on the streets here. And unless something's happened very, very recently, the Portland Police Department does very little to give support to the police officer and their families. And any of you out there who have
But it's a career.
had a military...
It is a career, right?
Well, it's a career like being in the military.
Yeah, it's a career like anybody else. Right?
But anybody who's been in the military or related to somebody who's been in the military understands what I'm talking about issues that come up.
Well,
And many years ago, a guy told me, his name was Orrin Bolstad from the Morrison Center. He told me something that I still think about today when I'm looking at problems and challenges. He says, all unresolved issues will resolve themselves, but usually will not resolve themselves in a positive way. So if we want a lot of the issues that come up in the time a police officer is a police officer, if we want those to be resolved in a positive way, we're going to have to expect the people we vote for take proactive action and bring in the tools and other things. But bottom line, nothing's really going to matter about anything we've said on this show if the people who are watching it don't take some proactive action on themselves and start asking questions. We've got a year, almost a year, before the primary elections. So you've got plenty of time to figure out what questions you want to ask, and then ask those questions and then listen. Very important to listen to what the people who want to represent us say when you ask them these questions.
Well, tell me this. What did this help a bit with reference to the book that Don has put together?
I think Don's book is a gift.
In the conversation we've had here.
If you want to understand part of the problem with our Portland police, you've got to read Don's book. It's like a 50-year history of bad habits. A lot of the habits that Don talks about in this book, cops still have to this very day here in Portland right now. So, for me, anybody who's serious about making things better in Portland, and personally, with my view, I think we're at a point in time where the community is saying we need a change in how law enforcement is, what their general orders are. We don't necessarily need a police department based on the 1910 model of policing. We need a model that's more like 2010, what it should have been in 2010. I think this is a great history lesson that I think everybody who cares about good policing and the changes that we need to make should read.
Now, you talked to a number of the cops. You're very familiar with these guys, and what do they say about this? We've done these shows and whatever. Don's got the book out there. What are they saying on the street?
I've asked a few cops, retired cops, about it. I haven't talked to any cops that are currently serving, but it's mixed. Some cops don't like talking about other cops, and they don't like other cops talking about other cops. They don't. Marines are kind of that way, as far as Marines don't like to talk about their guys in their unit unless it's good stuff. You know what I mean? And they don't like other people talking about guys in their unit. So you should understand that a lot. Anybody who's been in the military, well, cops look at themselves as a unit. You know what I mean? Where like every cop in the department is part of their unit. It's just bad juju. But I've been surprised. A couple of guys have said some positive things about the book.
Yeah.
But I'm going to respect them. I'm not going to talk about their names and stuff like that. They still have to feel good when they're sitting down with their fellow police officers, retired or not.
What sort of feedback have you gotten from the standpoint that, and it's been sort of a perception that the Portland police runs the city?
Well, they could. Phil Stanford and a couple other people tell me the Portland police still do, but there is no doubt that at least up until maybe as late as 1980, but for sure when he became a police officer in 1960, the Portland police ran this town. They did. My grandfather said it. All of his old retired criminal friends said it. If you wanted to do anything in this town criminal-minded, if the Portland police didn't approve it, you just disappeared. and there was nobody that was going to be looking for you.
But where are we today? Should we continue along that path? I mean, from what I'm hearing and what I'm reading right here, that's not the way we need to go.
Well, I think there needs to be a change. I think the old days, maybe that was efficient.
Okay.
Maybe it was efficient. But with technology now, there's a lot more education in our community. Even people who haven't graduated high school can educate themselves at a level that nobody could, 50 years ago.
But they're all
people
degrees
changed.
now. But they're all degreed person.
But people have changed. Society has changed.
Yeah.
And we may need to be looking at how we need to change law enforcement to meet the way we are today. Like I said, back in the 60s, they were still based on how, crime worked back in 1910, where a cop literally knew where all the bad actors were, where there were bosses, like real bosses. You know what I mean? Bosses like, if we had them today, they're very quiet about it. We don't have that today.
Well,
People need to realize, too, that police work is a unique profession.
Right.
There's nothing like it. And the military is not exactly like it. It's a unique profession, and it has to be treated uniquely. These people have to be have to have more support from the community. You shoot somebody or you get this stress out, this 15-year retirement that I like. It's because it's unique, and it needs to be treated unique. So the leaders, the mayor, the commissioners, they need to understand that this is not just police work in general. This is a unique profession, and it has to be treated specially. We have to address it differently than we address the Park Bureau or the Water Bureau and the retirement problem. It's unique. It needs to be treated differently.
But under this uniqueness, do you feel police of today will respect the leadership in terms of them identifying signing off on the policies and guidelines of police work? What do you think about that?
I think that they are scared of any change.
They're scared of any change.
I think that the police are scared of any change. They don't want change. That's one of the reasons that some of this internal affairs violation of the 14th Amendment continues, is because they don't want change. They're afraid of it. They like it the way it is. They like being in charge.
Don's right. I mean, my first experience dealing with cops not liking change was the big brouhaha in the Portland Police Department back in the 90s when the Portland Police decided to put computers in their cars so they could look up things, look up driver's license, look up, and a lot of the older cops freaked and said, you can't be a good cop fiddling with a toy like that. We were looking at this great advancement, putting more information in the hands of cops, especially when they're doing, pulling people over, for traffic stops and stuff, which is really one of the big motivating factors why the Portland police wanted to get it. But the old cops did not like change at all, and we actually had a handful of cops retire. They specifically retired a little early, so they didn't have to deal with what they call a toy in in a police car. They were not going to do it. Some guy, I remember telling me, some cop told me his notepad was all he needed. His notepad and his memory. That's all he needed. And he says, anything I don't have on my notepad in my memory, I can get on the radio. And he was dead serious, and this is the 1990s. So cops in general, historically, are slow to change. But what a city has to look at is where it needs to go. And what the city has to do is make the changes today. And you're going to lose some people. If a person can't, the public servant go with the direction that the public wants or what the public needs, then maybe it's best that they find something else better to do. But the new people coming in, they'll conform to what the people want. It's unfortunate, but it's like any other profession. If you work in a company and the company decides to make some changes, and the people who could go along with those changes, they get to stay. The people who can't go along with those changes, they got to find something else better to do.
Follow up on that, Don. What do you think?
I had a stack of 3x5 cards. I had a stack of 3x5 cards. We didn't have a computer. And everything I knew about you, I wrote it down on the card. If you had a mugshot, I had it in there, and I put it in a little gray box. And it was in my briefcase, and it was in the back seat. So that was my file. That was my file. Technology wasn't around.
Yep.
That's how
would you feel if you had a laptop that you could look up everybody?
I think it's terribly distracting, for one thing. The citizens are not allowed to use their cell phones. These cops are. It's wrong.
But what about when they're stopped? I see a lot of cops pull over to the side.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. There's
Yeah.
been a lot of police crashes because they're computing when they should be driving. You know, it's technology. Can you stop it? I don't know.
Well, like I
Is
said,
it a good
the
idea?
change thing is a key, and I guess
Yeah,
the other thing I'm gonna throw out on the table,
Yeah.
does a cop recognize who the employer is?
No,
Okay.
because they're not held responsible to their employer.
Okay.
That's the insulating factor that they don't want to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you were held responsible to the people you work for, the citizens,
Yeah.
then I don't know of any other profession that's not held responsible to their
And
employers.
the only thing we can do that is that we got to make sure that we elect the person that, if you will, that can supervise that deal for us, right?
Yes, yes.
Well, one
So
thing
what's
in
that-
defense and cops I will say is one thing that I think hasn't happened in our city, maybe ever, but definitely is not going on right now, is it is not clear what the entire mission of the Portland Police is right now.
Okay.
You know, how does the city of Portland, as far as from mayor on down, how they're expecting the Portland Police to approach crime and resolving issues in Portland. You know, the DA is part of that.
Yeah.
The DA doesn't think they're part of it, but that's
They
where
are.
the citizens let the DA know
Public
about it.
defenders,
Because
yeah.
honestly, it is very demoralizing for a cop to put somebody they know as a threat in jail, you know, arrest them, and then see that person literally walk out, you know, hours later. Especially when they know we've got a vacant jail, you know, here in this county. They don't understand how that affects morale, how that affects the whole process of a person being committed to doing their job. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the DA knows nobody's going to hurt me or my family, because then the federal government, the Marines, and everybody goes after you. But your average mom and dad out there, they're not the DA. Their wives and their husbands or their kids don't have this cloak of protection like, you know, Rod Underhill does. Rod Underhill knows it's going to make international news.
Talking about the DA.
The DA, if somebody touches him or his family, you know what I mean? So they're kind of safe. The criminals know, bad people know. You touch Rod Underhill or his family, you know, they're going to call in the Marines for you. You understand? But they're not going to do that for your average Portlander. You understand? So when a criminal does something, rapes somebody, attempts to rape somebody, we got a lot of domestic violence out there where women are scared. You know, they got a guy who's actually tried to, you know, hurt them. When a cop sees people like that go to jail for hours and then come back out, it's kind of demoralizing. You know, it shows that the city and the county, they really don't have a plan or an understanding of how to approach violent crime
But
right
then on
now.
the other side, I'm gonna throw this out there. But now with the advent of the smartphone, what about those atrocities?
What do you mean?
My point is that there's a lot of that stuff going on, you know, from the standpoint of the bad, as you say, the bad cop.
Correct.
And in today's criteria is that you got the bad cop, but they get released.
Well, I
Nothing
think
gets
we would
done.
have fewer bad cops if we addressed the PTSD issue, if we had a more clear understanding of what kind of police work we wanted.
Okay.
Because that goes into who we recruit and who we allow to become a
Who
cop.
needs to put that
Well,
program together?
it comes down to one in Portland, the number one person, whoever is our mayor, and then
Who,
two.
you don't know your mayor?
Oh, well, Charlie Hales.
Okay, all right.
But the thing is, this problem existed before Charlie came in.
I know, but
now,
I'm
right now,
saying-
it's his problem to try to resolve.
Right.
But this is a problem that he inherited. The issue, and also it was around when Shrunk was, Rod Underhill's,
DA.
the current DA, he inherited a lot of stuff. Now, it's his job right now. It is Hale's job right now to improve it, to make things better. And part of that is communicating to the police how we're going to approach crime in this town,
Right.
especially violent crime. And then two, communicate that to the public. Say, public, this is how we're going to approach crime.
Right.
And allow the public to have some serious feedback on that. You know, I think if the people we voted for started taking that direction into addressing, you know, issues of threat and how to police us, I think we're going to see lower crime, especially violent crime. But we're also going to see fewer bad cops, or fewer cops acting out, because sometimes we've had some bad cops just have a bad day. And the bad thing is when a good cop has a bad day, it leaves a lasting impression.
And it's on YouTube in 20 minutes.
And not just that, it could also change a person's life, you know, unnecessarily. You understand? So, like I said, I think we're at a turning point where we've got to look at the whole issue of law enforcement and policing globally, and we had to stop mentioning this thing called community policing just yet, because we've never had community policing.
Well, we did. We talked about that.
Well, not in my lifetime.
He knew this community. No, he knew his community.
Not in my lifetime.
He was policing his area, and so but we just reversed it.
Not in my lifetime. A cop can't do what Don did, and the cops that he served today. They just can't. They're in their cars too much. There's too much on them. We don't have enough police officers on the police force to allow us to have cops who are involved in the community at the level that Don was 50 years ago. We just numerically don't have it. We actually had, when Don was a police officer, we actually had more cops, numerically, more cops in the city of Portland than we do today. We had over 1,000 cops back when he was a police officer.
700.
No,
700.
1967.
He's a cop now.
I know, but 1967, the official number was like 1,100. And look, that's what I looked at.
One of the things that needs to be addressed too is more attention to the juvenile problem, because I can remember more times than I want to. I arrested a juvenile, took him down to the juvenile division. He was out in a couple hours and committing another crime. I arrested him twice in the same day. And so, what does that say about responsibility? What does that say about holding people responsible? They're never. The juveniles are rarely held responsible, and they go on. Now you're 18, or now you're going to prison.
Well, we had early childhood development. Now we came up with a new model, if you will, and that was supposed to hopefully address some of those issues.
Yeah, it failed. I mean, we've had, like I was saying to some people, earlier today about, albino Head Start. Albino Head Start is an absolute failure, because a lot of the 500 black men and black people who have been murdered in gang violence, and most of their murderers probably went to Head Start, and most of the victims probably went to Head Start. I mean, 100 years ago, people are going to be looking back at Albino Head Start and going, wow, what a good con. You know what I mean? There were fewer black people being murdered before Albino Head Start than afterwards. But Don, there's something you just said here that I think is very, very fascinating. Back in the 1960s, we had a population in Portland of what? 250,000?
Yeah.
Like around there? In his opinion, they had 700 cops. The official number was 1,100. But let's say it was just 700. Today, depending on who you talk to, we got between 650 and 750 as far as 1,000 people. 650 to 750,000 people. We only have about 930 police officers. So we've got 3 times more cops, population. Probably 4 times the territory. And we have only about 200 more cops from his memory. And also remember this: most of Portland, that's current Portland today, east of 82nd, wasn't annexed back then.
That's right.
Most of it. Matter of fact, if you get into northeast Portland, most of 60th and east wasn't annexed yet. So we've got a territory that's probably 4 times more than it was back then, but only about 200 more cops. And I bet most of those 200 more cops aren't street cops. I bet only about, I'd be surprised if it was 50 of them were actually on the street.
Wow.
I bet we have only about 50 more cops actually on the street today than we did 50 years ago numerically.
Well, that's what we were talking about. That was
When they expanded, they took the sheriff's office officers and made them Portland policemen. And so that expanded it somewhat.
That's probably where most of that 200 came from.
Yeah.
That's right. But for essentially, you can say that our police force, though the space that we're covering and the population we're covering is larger, the Portland police have not increased in size. It's kind of fascinating that things haven't gotten even worse than they are. But then again, it goes back to what I tell everybody: I don't feel a city like Portland should have the violent level that we've got right now. That's just not part of our makeup in this town. We're not LA.
That's right.
We're not New York.
No, that's right. That's right.
There is no excuse for the level of violence. Everything from domestic violence to gang violence to some of the violence that we're seeing in our nightclubs.
I agree with that.
I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
it doesn't make any sense.
Let me ask you something. Thinking about you, Don, is when that Miranda thing came up, from the standpoint you had to state whatever this, that, and when did that come in when you were there?
Yes.
When did it come in?
In the 60s. I don't remember the
60s.
exact date, but
Okay.
it was the 60s.
And what good has it done? Has it done?
Well, it hasn't done, it really never made any difference. It scared a lot of policemen because they thought, well, now if I tell you you don't have to talk to me, you won't. but that really never happened. As a detective, when I was interrogating people, these are your rights. You signed a little card. Now let's talk about this. Okay. So mostly they do. There seems to be a compulsion to confess. You know,
If you did wrong.
I remember my supervisor, Myron Warren. He said that the only ones that really never talked to me were the ones that really got away, because he could make most people talk to you. Some of these investigators were pretty good at interrogating people. I was one of them. John Skokel was another one. He was an expert. He could get you to say anything. So the Miranda really had no effect after the initial scare. So, and I don't think it has any effect today.
Yes, it did something else.
If I tell you, you have the right to remain silent, shut up.
Now, I want to point out something. This is one of the areas I think causes a lot of PTSD with cops. One of my friends, one of our mutual friends, Charles Jensen. They call him C.W. Jensen.
CW, yeah.
I think Charles Jensen to this day is affected by the Wesley Allen Dodd case. And he gave Wesley Allen Dodd the Miranda rights and said you don't have to talk. And those of you who don't remember should definitely Google up that case. One of the most horrible child molesting cases we've ever had. CW was the guy who interviewed him and sat in a room with him for 6 hours and listened to this guy talk about everything he had ever done to a kid.
Wow.
Everything. I mean, graphically. He had to write all that down, had to record it, so they could make sure they have a case against this guy. And then he went in and told CW what he wanted to do to kids and couldn't get to do. Oh. And they needed that too for the investigation.
Wow.
I think that does nothing but cause PTSD for cops.
Wow. Well, evidently we've got quite a bit more discussion on this issue, but at least we started.
Yeah.
We started the discussion. I think it's very, very important. Fred, we want to thank you because right in front, we like your openness and your opinion because we need to talk about this issue. And I agree with you. We're in Portland, Oregon. We're not Chicago. We're not LA. We have an opportunity to do something, maybe even share with the rest of the country of how to do it right. Okay, fine. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for being with us. Appreciate it. Hey,
My pleasure.
and for you out there, hey, you heard it. Talk among yourselves. Get together and talk. Play it over again. Say whatever. The fact of the matter is, these folks had the courage to come up here and do something, especially behind the badge in River City. Gives you the primer.
Put it up so you can see it.
On that piece. Okay, here it is, right there. You can just basically look at what we've been talking about and just kind of read this document right here, and you'll be in good shape. Okay, take care. Have a good one. See you next week, guys. Thanks.